Yeah, so good evening. So sorry for the delay, right? So in the previous session, we started discussing with the theories of evolution. So under theories of evolution, we started off with the first theory, which is called as Lamarckism. So we have almost done with the concept of Lamarck, what things Lamarck had done or said pertaining to the process of evolution. And we also spoke about the principles or postulates, which was actually given by Lamarck in his theory, right? And we also said that all the postulates which was given by Lamarck have been written in his book called as Philosophy Zoology. So three important postulates of Lamarck. So we have already discussed that in the previous session. So quickly going through those three postulates, what Lamarck has said. The first one is influence of environment on a particular organism. The second postulate was use and disuse of organs. And the third postulate was the process of inheritance of this acquired character. So we have gone into the details of all of these three postulates in the previous session, and we also gave a couple of examples to show what Lamarck had said with regards to the use of organs as well as the disuse of the organs as well, right? And along with that, we also took up with, or rather started off with a concept talking about the objections of Lamarck's theory. And we said that one of the major objections of Lamarck's theory comes from a scientist, a well-known scientist or prominent scientist by name August Weismann, who performed something called as the decaudalization experiment in case of rats. So we also saw what experiments he had done, right, with regards to the decaudalization experiment. So he cut the tails of the rat, and he started breeding those two rats or crossing those two rats without the tail. And in the offspring or in the progeny generations, he obtained rats with the tail. So this experiment was continued for almost 22 different generations, right? In all the generations, he observed that the rats were born with the tail only, disproving Lamarck's theory. So I told you that in this juncture, August Weismann came up with one theory, right? August Weismann came up with the one theory, which is called as the germplasm theory. So that we'll take up today, right? We'll see what he had said in this particular theory called as the germplasm theory, right? So what he said in germplasm theory. So the germplasm theory of August Weismann. Right? So let us take up with the germplasm theory of August Weismann, and we'll see what he exactly told in this particular theory. So what Weismann said in this theory is, he said that all living organisms have two types of plasms, right? You take any living organism, all living organism has two types of plasms, right? He said all living organisms have two types of plasms. One, he called it as somatoplasm. So one was called as somatoplasm and the other one was called as the germplasm, right? So the first plasm was called as somatoplasm and the second one was called as the germplasm. Somatoplasm contained all the body cells, right? It included all body cells except the sex cells, whereas the germplasm contained only the sex cells, right? So what August Weismann said in his germplasm theory is, you take any organism, all of the living organism consists of two different types of plasms. One is called as the somatoplasm and the other one is called the germplasm. Somatoplasm includes all of the body cells or all of the somatic cells, right? So somatoplasm includes all of the body cells or the somatic cells, whereas the germplasm, it includes only the sex cells, right? So the germplasm includes only the sex cells. Now, whatever changes or variations are seen in the somatoplasm, that is the body cells, they are not transmitted to the next generation, right? Try to understand this. What August Weismann said is, any sort of variations or changes that are seen in the somatoplasm, that is the body cells, they are not transmitted to the next generation, whereas the variations which are seen only in the germplasm are passed on into the next generation. right? So this he started calling it as the germplasm theory. So based on this theory, again, he started disproving Lamarck's theory, stating that whatever variations or whatever changes appear in the somatic cells, they are not inherited to the next generation, whereas the changes or variations that are seen only in the germplasm or the sex cells, those variations alone are being inherited to the next generation, right? So this is what he had said with regards to the germplasm theory, right? Now, this theory again disproves Lamarck's theory of evolution, right? Now, there are a couple of examples also what we can take to disprove Lamarck's theory. One such example, what the scientists usually say is, as per Lamarck, what did he say? Any character acquired by an organism during its lifetime, right? Any character developed by an organism during its lifetime is called as an acquired character. That was the statement which was given by Lamarck. And he said that this acquired character would be passed on from generation to generation. That is what we saw in the third postulate, inheritance of acquired character. Right. But again, the decaudalization experiments in rats disproves Lamarck's theory. Right. We'll take up one more example. Right. The next example what we'll be talking about is the muscles. Right. Muscles of a bodybuilder. Right. Muscles of a bodybuilder. Right. I hope all would have seen a bodybuilder, right? Or rather an athlete, right? Any bodybuilder or athlete or any boxing champion, whoever it is, right? So they all have a well-toned muscles, right? So all of them have a well-toned muscle, that is a well-developed muscle, right? So development of muscles during the lifetime of a person is nothing but an acquired character, as per Lamarck. Right. If Lamarck's theory is true, what should happen? The children of this bodybuilder, right, or an athlete should be born with the muscles, with the highly toned muscle. But is that happening? That is not happening. So therefore, Lamarck's theory was disproved. Right. So this is one more example what we can take to disprove Lamarck's theory, where the scientists usually quoted this example to disprove Lamarck's theory. One more example is, right, one more example is perforations, right? Perforations in pinna of the ear, right? So this is usually seen in case of females, right? Human females. If you see, most of the human females, it's our Indian culture, right? So it has been there for centuries together, right? Where the female individual will start making perforation or small hole in the pinna of the ear to wear some sort of ornaments. Nowadays, even males are also doing it. But anyways, so in case of females, perforation in pinna of the ear. So that is again an acquired character, because the perforation is actually made during the lifetime of an individual, right? During the lifetime of an individual. So this perforation would now become an acquired character. Now, as per Lamarck, what should happen? The children who are born to a woman having perforations in the ear, their children also should be born with the perforations in the ear. But is that happening? That is not happening. Again, we can start disproving Lamarck's theory with these two examples. So like this, there are several other examples what the scientists have quoted to disprove Lamarck's theory. Of all of these objections, what Lamarck had got, major objections was given by this particular scientist by name August Weismann, where he performed the decaudalization experiments in case of rats to disprove the Lamarck's theory of evolution. Right? So this is what we have with the Lamarck's theory, or we also call it as Lamarckism. Right? Once all of these objections were put forth by several scientists, right? Once all of these objections were put forth by several scientists, some of the supporters of Lamarck, right? Some of the supporters of Lamarck, scientists by name. So we have a list of scientists. Scientists by name Osborne, right? Scientists by name Pope, right? Another scientist by name Spencer Packard, right? And another scientist by name Spencer, right? So they are actually considered as supporters of Lamarck, right? So these scientists, who are actually considered as supporters of Lamarck, started making some modifications in Lamarck's theory, right? So they started making some modifications in Lamarck's theory, trying to make it more acceptable, right? Trying to make it more acceptable on scientific basis. On scientific basis, what they said is again the same thing. All the organisms are subjected to some sort of variations because of the influence of the environment, right? So due to the influence of the environment, all organisms are somewhat subjected to variations, right? Now, if there are some sort of changes in the somatic cells, if you could recollect what we saw with regards to August Priestman, we said that, or August Priestman said that any changes in the somatic cells or body cells will not be inherited, but changes seen in the sex cells alone will be inherited from generation to generation. Now, what these scientists started talking is, if there are some sort of changes in the somatic cells, what they actually said is, all organisms are subjected to some sort of variations, right? Now, there is some sort of secretions which are generated by the somatic cells due to the influence of the environment, right? Let me put it once again. Due to the influence of the environment, the somatic cells will start producing some sort of secretions. Now, these secretions from the somatic cells will start reaching the sex cells, right? Once those secretions from the somatic cells, once they start reaching the sex cells, then the variations would be inherited from generation to generation. That is what these scientists usually say. So what do they say? Due to the influence of the environment on an organism. So what exactly is happening? There are some secretions being produced by the somatic cells. Now these secretions reach the sex cells through the blood, right? It reaches the sex cells through the blood, such that those variations now would be transferred from one generation to the other generation. So this is the argument which these scientists usually do. Therefore, this scientist, or rather this particular theory, including this modification, was termed as, right? It was termed as Neo-Lamarckism, right? So they called it as Neo-Lamarckism. They started calling it as Neo-Lamarckism. So what we saw till now is all about Lamarckism, but these scientists, right, started adding up or started modifying Lamarck's theory, right, such that trying to make it more acceptable on a scientific basis, and they started calling it as Neo-Lamarckism, right? So this is what we have with the Lamarck's theory of evolution, right? So based on certain scientific basis, one of the important theories what we study whenever we talk about the theories of evolution is this Lamarckism. So the first theory pertaining to the process of evolution, or rather the theories of evolution, is this Lamarck's theory, right? I hope all are now clear with this particular theory called Lamarck's theory, or simply we can call it as Lamarckism, right? So moving on to the second theory what we have in the list, right? So the second theory what we'll be talking about is called as Darwinism, or we simply call it as the Darwin's theory, right? So either Darwinism or Darwin's theory. So let us take up with the Darwin's theory. So before we get into the postulates of this particular theory, let us get into some introductory note with regards to Darwin's theory, right? So let's get into some introductory note with regards to Darwin's theory. We also call it as Darwinism. So just like Darwin's theory, or just like Lamarck's theory, what we also call it as Lamarckism, here we also call it as Darwinism, right? So this theory, or called as Darwinism or Darwin's theory of evolution, was put forth by one of the most prominent scientists at that point of time. So he is an English naturalist, right? So this scientist is an English naturalist by name, right? English naturalist by name Charles Robert Darwin, right? So this theory, that is Darwinism or Darwin's theory, was proposed by an English naturalist by name Charles Darwin theory, right? Sorry, Charles Robert Darwin. Charles Robert Darwin came up with his theory called as Darwinism, or we simply call it as the Darwin's theory. Right. Now, Darwin actually, he was an English scientist, right? He was an English scientist from England. He actually went on a voyage, right? He went on a voyage for 5 years, right? He went on a voyage for 5 years, that is from 1831 1836, right? So for 5 long years, he went on a voyage from 1831 to 1836 in a world survey ship, right? In a world survey ship by name HMS Beagle, right? So this is an important one, what you need to remember, right? So he went on a voyage. He went on a voyage in a British survey ship by the government of British, right? In a ship by name HMS Beagle, right? So in this ship, while traveling in this ship, he came across the flora and fauna of several continents, right? He came across the flora and fauna of several continents as well as several islands. So he started observing different kinds of animals, both plants as well as animals, regarding or in different continents or different islands. Right. So this is what we have with an introductory note. Right. Now, Darwin was influenced by three major publications. Right. So one of the theory which was given by Darwin was actually influenced. He was influenced by three important publications. So let us see those three publications and we'll see what those three publications say, right? And then we'll get into the postulates which was given by Darwin. So as I've already said, he was influenced by three publications, right? He was influenced by three publications, of which the first publication was, right? The first publication, right? The first publication was an essay on. The first publication was an essay on, right? An essay on the principles of, right? An essay on the principles of population. So this was the first publication through which Darwin was inspired, right? An essay on the principles of population. So this publication, right? So this publication was given by a scientist by name Thomas Malthus. Right? So this publication was given by a scientist by name Thomas Malthus. Now, what does this publication say? An essay on the principles of population. So what does this publication say? Thomas Malthus spoke about two important things in this publication. One is regarding population. From the name itself, we can make out principles of population. So he started talking about the population of different organisms. So what did he say? Population increases in a geometric progression, right? Any organism, right? Any organism, it always increases in geometric progression, whereas the food source increases in arithmetic progression. That is the one what he explained in this particular publication. So what did he say? Organisms increase in, right? Organisms, they always increase in geometric progression, right? It increases in geometric progression, whereas the food sources, right? The food sources always increase in arithmetic progression. Arithmetic progression. This is the concept of the paper titled An Essay on the Principles of Population. So what did he say? Organism, you take any organism, it increases in geometric progression, whereas the food sources always increase in arithmetic progression. So Darwin started using this concept in his postulates, right? What we'll be studying in a few moments from now, right? So this is the first book through which he was influenced. The second paper through which Darwin was influenced is, right? So the second paper through which Darwin was influenced is the principles of geology. right? It is the principles of geology. So this is the second paper through which Darwin was mostly influenced, right? The principles of geology. Now this principles of geology was written by another scientist, right? By name Sir Charles Lyell, right? So Sir Charles Lyell wrote this particular paper, right? The principles of geology, through which Darwin was again mostly impressed or influenced by this particular publication. Now, what did Sir Charles Lyell say in this principles of geology? Charles Lyell spoke about two important concepts, right? He spoke about two important concepts. One is something related to gradualism. One is gradualism. The second one is uniformitarianism. Right? So one is gradualism and the other one is uniformitarianism. So these are the two important concepts which are included in this particular publication, the principles of geology. One is gradualism and uniformitarianism. Now, what does this mean, gradualism? So he started talking about the changes of the earth, right? So what he said under this title, gradualism, is the earth underwent some sort of changes very slowly, number one, and gradually. So the changes that had taken place on the earth are very slow and they are gradual. That he spoke about in gradualism. Second thing, what he spoke about is uniformitarianism. So what did he say in uniformitarianism? What he said is the fundamental laws that operate today on the earth were same as that of the past. Right? Let me repeat it once again. The fundamental laws that operate today on the earth were almost same as that in the past. So there is uniformity seen in the laws that operate on the planet earth in the past ages, even today also. So that he spoke about in uniformitarianism, right? So two important concepts of principles of geology, gradualism as well as uniformitarianism. The second paper or second publication through which Darwin was highly influenced. So the third paper through which Darwin was influenced is, right? So the third paper through which Darwin was influenced is on the tendencies of varieties, right? It is on the tendencies of varieties, on the tendencies of varieties to depart from the original type, from the original type. So this was the third publication through which Darwin was influenced, right? On the tendencies of varieties, right? On the tendencies of varieties to depart from the original type. So this is the third publication through which Darwin was influenced, right? And this paper was published by a scientist by name Alfred Russel Wallace, right? So this was given by Alfred Russel Wallace. Right? So Alfred Russel Wallace was a scientist who came up with this publication called On the Tendencies of Varieties to Depart from its Original Type. So three important publications, right? So three important publications through which Darwin was highly influenced. The first one, an essay on the principles of population written by Thomas Malthus. Second one, the principles of geology written by Sir Charles Lyell. And the third one, on the tendencies of varieties to depart from the original type by Alfred Russel Wallace. Right. So based on these three publications, right? So based on these three publications, Darwin wrote his book, right? Darwin wrote his book. So what is the title of his book? So I'm just erasing this here. So based on these three publications, Darwin started writing down his postulates or principles on the book entitled The Origin of Species. The Origin of Species. Right? So this is the title. It can be elongated also. Origin of Species by means of natural selection. So this was the book that was written by Darwin, right? So by taking into consideration all the three publications which were written by these three scientists, that is Thomas Malthus, Sir Charles Lyell, and Alfred Russel Wallace, Darwin started writing down his book, or he started putting all his postulates as well as principles in his book, The Theory, The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, right? So two important key concepts, right? So two important key concepts of Darwin's theory are, right? So before we get into the postulates, two important key concepts of Darwin's theory is, first one is branching descent, and the second one is natural selection. Right? So these are the two key concepts of Darwin's theory of evolution. That is branching descent as well as the process of natural selection. Right? So this is what we have with some introductory note with regards to the Darwin's theory of evolution. So now let's get into the principles of Darwin's theory, or the postulates of Darwin's theory. Right? So let's get into the principles of Darwin's theory, or the postulates of Darwin's theory, just like what we saw in the previous session with regards to Lamarckism, the postulates of Lamarckism. Similarly, let's first take up with all the postulates which was given by Darwin, right? So the postulates of Darwin's theory. So talking about the postulates of Darwin. So in the previous session, Lamarck, we took up with three important postulates which was given by Lamarck. So here we'll be talking about 6 important postulates which was given by Darwin with regards to the process of evolution, right? So first we'll take down those 6 postulates together, then we'll get into each one in little detail, right? So the first postulate what Darwin spoke about, right? So the first postulate what Darwin spoke about is a process called as overproduction, right? So this is the first one, overproduction. So this is the first postulate which was given by Darwin, or it is also called as prodigality of production. Overproduction or prodigality of production, we can just take it down as overproduction. Second thing, or the second postulate of Darwin's theory is, right? Second postulate of Darwin's theory is constancy in population. So this is the second postulate which was given by Darwin. Constancy in population, that is nothing but consistency in population, or consistency of population. This is the second postulate which is given by Darwin. The third postulate what we have is the struggle for existence. Right, this is the third postulate what we have, which is called as the struggle for existence. This is the third postulate, struggle for existence. The fourth postulate what we have is universal occurrence of variation. It is universal occurrence of variation. So this is the fourth postulate of Darwin, which is called as the universal occurrence of variation, right? So the fifth postulate is called as the theory of, or rather simply, it is called as the natural selection. Natural selection. So this is the fifth postulate, that is natural selection. And the sixth postulate, I'm just writing it down here. The sixth postulate is called as speciation. Speciation. S-P-E-C. Right? It is called as speciation. Speciation is nothing but origin of species. Right? So these are the 6 postulates or 6 principles which was given by Darwin. The first one, overproduction. Second one, constancy in population. Third one, struggle for existence. Fourth one, universal occurrence of variations. Fifth one, the natural selection, and sixth one, speciation as well as origin of species. Right. Now, let us take up with the first one, which is the topic called as overproduction. The first postulate, which is called as overproduction. Now, what does this mean? From the name itself, we can say that, right? From the name itself, we can say that overproduction, producing more, right? So, if we see, this could be directly related to the production of organisms through the process of reproduction, right? If you could remember, we just saw the first publication through which Darwin was influenced, right? Principles of population, an essay on the principles of population. So what Thomas Malthus said in that particular paper, we spoke about two things. One is increase in the population, right? So the population increases in geometric progression, whereas the food increases in arithmetic progression. Now, because there is increase in geometric progression, there is overproduction of organisms happening. Right. So the first postulate, he starts talking about production of more and more animals. So with regards to that, he came up, we can consider two simple examples, right, with regards to overproduction. First one, talking about salmon fish, right? So talking about salmon fish, I hope all would have been familiar with salmon fish, right? So this fish, salmon fish, it produces around 28 million eggs. Right? It produces 28 million eggs in one season, right? We are talking about only one season, not in its lifetime. So in one season, the salmon fish produces around 28 million eggs. Similarly, we can take one more example also, starfish, right? So starfish, I hope all are familiar with starfish. So starfish also produces around 1 million egg. 1 million eggs during each season, right? We are talking about each season, and remember, not about the lifetime of this organism. So during each season, this salmon fish, it has the ability to produce 28 million eggs, whereas the starfish would produce 1 million eggs during each season. Now just imagine that if all of these eggs hatch, and if the larva of all of these eggs would survive up to the reproductive age, right? So just imagine that if all of these eggs would hatch, right, and the larva of all of these eggs would survive till the reproductive age, what would be the condition? Within a few generations only, all the seas would be filled with these two organisms only. So that he spoke about overproduction, right? So what's happening in overproduction is there is drastic multiplication of organisms happening. One more example also scientists gave, right? So this example was regards to elephant. So we know that elephant is the one which is actually considered as the slowest breeder, right? So even the slowest breeder, that is elephant, it has the ability to produce 19 million descendants, right? It can produce 19 million descendants, right, by the end of 800th generation. By the end of 800th generation, provided in the absence of any checks, right? So if there is, everything is unlimited, all the resources are unlimited, at that point of time, even the slowest breeder, that is elephant, also can produce around 19 million descendants by the end of 800th generation. That he started talking about here with regards to overproduction. So what he said is, through overproduction, there is more and more number of organisms being produced, right? So as Thomas Malthus said, right? As Thomas Malthus said, already said, the number of organisms in a population always increase in geometric progression, right? So that is what he spoke about in his first postulate, which is overproduction. Now, talking about the second, constancy in population. Now, even though each organism produces so many offsprings, large number of these organisms would usually die before they reach their reproductive age, right? So what he said in the second point is, even though so many different or we can put it this way, even though so many organisms are formed, are produced by each species of organism, a large number of organisms would usually die before they reach their reproductive age. So why do most of these die before they reach the reproductive age? Because of certain limitations that are present on the earth. Limitations with regards to food, limitations with regards to space, that is shelter, right? So due to these sort of limitations or due to limited resources, a large number of organisms usually die before they reach their reproductive age. Therefore, maintaining consistency in the population, maintaining an equilibrium in the population. That is what he spoke about the second one. First one, what did he say? He spoke with regards to overproduction. So what did he say with regards to overproduction? The number of organisms keeps multiplying, right? The number of organisms would keep multiplying in such a way that they keep multiplying in a geometric progression. We took a couple of examples here. Salmon fishes, 28 million eggs per season. We are talking about only one season. Similarly, starfish, 1 million egg per season. Right. So we said that if all these eggs would hatch and all the larvae are allowed to live or survive till the reproductive age, what would be the condition? All the seas would be filled with these two organisms only. Similarly, the slowest breeder, the elephant would produce approximately 19 million descendants by the end of their 800th generation, provided there is absence of any sort of check with regards to some sort of resources. So if there is availability of resources throughout, right? So elephants only could lead to a production of approximately 19 million descendants by the end of their 800th generation. But what exactly is happening? But most of the organisms, majority of the organisms will not survive till the reproductive age. Why they don't survive till the reproductive age? Because of certain limitations that are seen on the earth. What sort of limitations? Limitations with regards to food, limitations with regards to shelter. The second point, if you could recollect what Thomas Malthus said, population increases in geometric fashion, whereas the food sources increase only in arithmetic fashion. So due to that limitation of natural resources or limitation of resources such as the food and shelter, majority of the organism would not survive till the reproductive age. As a result of which, what is happening? A consistency in population is being maintained. So there is consistency in the population. See, this is what he spoke about in the second type of, in the second postulate. Moving on to the third postulate, which is struggle for existence. So what does this mean? In the second postulate, we said that due to the limited resources present, most of the organisms would die. So why would organisms die because of limited resources? Because of limited resources, there is some sort of competition between the organisms. As a result of this competition, what is happening? Whichever organism wins will survive. Whichever organism loses in the competition will die. That is what he meant for struggle for existence. So any organism living on this planet Earth should undergo some sort of struggle for their existence, right? Struggle with regards to food, struggle with regards to shelter, and struggle with regards to their mate also. So the organism which is able to survive that sort of competition or struggle alone will be surviving, whereas the other organisms would usually die. So with regards to this, Darwin came up with three different types of struggles, right? So Darwin came up with three different types of struggles. So the first type of struggle, he called it as intra-specific struggle. Call it as intra-specific struggle. The second one, he called it as interspecific struggle. Interspecific struggle. The third one, what he called it is environmental struggles. Right? So the third one, what he called is environmental struggle. Environmental struggle. Right? So three different sort of struggles he came up with. One is intraspecific struggle, second one is interspecific struggle, and the third one is environmental struggle. Now, what does this mean, intraspecific struggle? We know that intra means inside or within. Specific is something to do with species. So here there is competition between organisms belonging to the same species. So if there is competition between organisms belonging to the same species with regards to food, shelter and mate, such sort of struggle is called as interspecific struggle. Sorry, intraspecific struggle. Second one, interspecific struggle. Inter means again, inter means between the species. So here he's talking about competition between organisms belonging to different species, right? Competition between organisms belonging to different species, he called it as interspecific struggle. Third one is environmental struggle. So what does this mean? Competition, or rather struggle of an organism pertaining to some sort of environmental conditions. Environmental conditions such as earthquakes, right? Environmental conditions such as earthquakes, right? Second one, volcanoes, floods, right? As well as some sort of tsunamis, drought, famine. So all these are considered as environmental struggle of a particular organism pertaining to some sort of changes in the environment, such as earthquakes, the volcanic eruptions, the floods, the famine, etc. So all the organisms which are able to survive in these sort of competitions will alone, or if they are able to survive these sort of competitions, will alone be surviving, whereas all the other organisms will die. That he spoke about his in the third postulate, which is struggle for existence, right? So when we talk about struggle for existence, there could be three different types of struggles. One is called intraspecific struggle, interspecific struggle, as well as the environmental struggle. So three postulates we have seen for today. One is overproduction. Second one, constancy in population, consistency in population. And the third one is struggle for existence, right? So we'll stop here for today. In the next session, we'll take up with these three more postulates, or we'll rather continue with these three more postulates. That is universal occurrence of variations, natural selection, as well as the concept called as speciation or origin of species. Fine. Thank you.